us, and the governor makes him a judge. So, and I know he did a great job for us, and I know he's doing a great job down in Common Pleas. He got his bachelor's degree at the University of Kentucky. You know, it's not my favorite college, but it's a good school. And his law degree at the University of Kentucky. So, great pleasure. Judge Carl Stich is here to give us some words of wisdom. Come on up, Judge.
Thank you. Well, I don't know, man, how many words of wisdom I have. Thank you. Thank you, David. Thanks for the gavel, too. I've been actually traveling around the county quite a bit for the past 9 months because I'm up for election this fall from the appointment. So I'm going around all the county, and it's just a wonderful thing to come back and actually be back home. So it's great to be here. And I have semi-fond memories of this room because the first meeting that we had when I was chairman of the Planning Commission was right here. Because we were at that point debating Mariemont D and whether or not we were going to have a new regulation for all those condos that have gone up now. Yeah. And so that first meeting was in here. And it was the one thing that I learned is that if you want to be unpopular, be the chairman of the Planning Commission. Because then you can tell your neighbors, no, you can't have that portico out front. No, you can't put that place that close to the back of your yard. But one thing that I wanted to do, because I have been going around the county, what's surprised me is how many people who are really very well informed about government and civic issues really don't know that much about the court system. And I think part of it is that they managed to stay out of it, which is probably a pretty good idea. But I wanted to explain to you a little bit about just kind of what I do, and I thought the best way to do that is just to give you a day in the life of being a common pleas court judge, because I'm approaching my 1-year anniversary, and it's been a very interesting experience. I'll never forget that first day that I went in, having practiced law for 33 years, and I go into my chambers, and wow, it's the judge's chambers, and I'm the judge, so I sit down, I'm kind of waiting, and I look over, and the phone's not ringing, and I look for emails, and there's no emails. If I get 2 emails a day, it's because there's a raging controversy in the courthouse. And if my phone rings, I swear, 50% of my phone calls have been wrong numbers. Because nobody calls. That's not the way your business gets done. And when I was in private practice, that's mostly the way I was getting things. So the phone was always ringing, the emails were always coming in, and it's a whole different world, and it's a very different experience. So let me tell you a little bit about how the day goes. Our days start at, generally we start with people coming in at about 9 o'clock for criminal cases. And if you really want to know what's going on, I brought some props. If you really want to know what's happening in the court, you can get one of these, the Cincinnati Court Index. This is one of the official publications in Hamilton County. If you want to give official notice to someone of something, you can put it in the court index. So my suggestion is if you're required to give official notice to somebody and you don't want them to ever see it, put it in here. Because the only people who ever look at this are lawyers and the people who want to buy property that's at foreclosure. Here's part of the foreclosure list, the sheriff's sales coming up. So this is the sort of stuff that you'll see. And that's only part of the list. It's continued on a later page. But if you flip through here, what you'll see is you've got the new suits that were filed, so you can look at that. And then you can look at the calendar. So it's got all the calendars here. So that's how you can figure out what's going on in any given courtroom. And if you turn to mine, you can see what I have on a given day. But I really don't go by this. I go by these things, which the clerk prints out for me. It tells me what's coming up on a given day. Now, for those who aren't that familiar with the Court of Common Pleas, it is the court that handles all the felonies, and it handles all the cases, the private disputes where there's fighting over more than $15,000. If you get a traffic ticket or you have a small claims thing, that would be municipal court. So you got to be in a lot more trouble or a lot more financial distress before you get up to the Court of Common Pleas. So anyway, sits there with a little machine and takes everything down so that if I make a mistake, somebody can appeal it. So I picked these kind of random. These were for the past few days. So I'll get these things that list what's coming up. And it doesn't give me a whole lot of information, but I'll have the file there. So 9 o'clock a.m. on this particular day. State of Ohio versus Jason Chadwick. I guess I can use his name, Terry, because it's published. And Terry will tell me about it. So he's up, let's see, breaking and entering, theft, safe cracking, breaking and entering, theft, safe cracking, theft of a motor vehicle, so he got kind of away from his normal mode. Safe cracking, engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity. Now, how did they come up with that? Theft, safe cracking, failure to comply with an order signal of a police officer. So that's kind of, I won't say that he's typical. The typical ones are more like theft or burglary or possession of cocaine or possession of heroin or trafficking in heroin. I would say probably between, at any given time, 60 to 80% of my cases are drug related in some way. Now, they might, even if it's not a possession or a trafficking, if it's a burglary or it's a theft offense, the likelihood is that they're stealing because they need to fuel their drug habit. By the same token, if a lot of the assaults, a lot of the shootings and the murders are because people who are in the drug trade are protecting their turf, and they're shooting each other up, and they're gangbanging, and they're doing all the things that you would hope wouldn't happen, but it's all, so much of it is just related to the drug traffic. And so that's so much of what will clog up the docket. So how do these cases, these felony cases, really kind of move through the system? Well, you've probably seen on TV, or you've seen the photographs online or in the Inquirer, somebody standing in this well-lit room, and it says, you know, so-and-so is charged with this, and there's an attorney next to their side. Well, that's because they're being arraigned. So they've been arrested, they take them from the Justice Center, they bring them in front of a municipal court judge. Those are the ones that handle the other stuff, but they handle the arraignment. So the municipal court judge will generally take a plea and set a bond. So now the person can either get out on bond if they can post it, or they go back to the Justice Center, they sit and wait. And then we start scheduling it for things. And we schedule it for disposition conferences, or what's called, this is a plea or trial setting, is the first one that's on here. So what's going to happen is that the lawyers are going to come in, and they're going to say, well, we're ready to set a plea, or we want to do some plea bargaining, or we want to do this or that. Or maybe they'll file a motion to suppress, and they'll say, you know, the evidence that was taken here was an illegal search, so you can't use that. So they want to have a hearing on that. So that has to be scheduled. Now, if they're locked up, they're entitled, whether they're locked up or not, they're entitled to a speedy trial. The law in Ohio is, if you're locked up, you should be tried within 90 days. Right? Now, if you're not locked up, you get 270 days, because for each day that you're not locked up, that counts for 3. So, let's suppose you've got this fellow here, and his lawyer is now trying to figure out how he's going to get this guy out, or what's he going to get the best deal. 98% of these cases are going to plead out, because there isn't, in most cases, a very good defense. So there aren't a whole lot of them that go to trial, but enough of them go to trial that it takes up some time. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, what's the sense of this? I mean, the police arrested this person for all of these offenses. Why don't you just try him or convict him on all those offenses? And there are a whole lot of very practical reasons for why a lawyer might want to plea bargain, and why the prosecutors might want to plea bargain, and why the judge might want to go along with it. For one thing, if you were to try every single one of these cases, you'd have to hire a bunch of additional judges because of the time that it takes. For another thing, it's not always that it's an easy open and shut case. And I'll give you a good example. A lot of the theft cases, the victim just doesn't show up in court. And if the victim doesn't show up in court, you can't make much of a case. Even worse situation where you've got domestic violence. The domestic violence victims are frequently, it's a wife or see their record. So let's suppose this fellow who is up on all these charges cuts a deal. And as a matter of fact, I know this fellow did cut a deal. And he pled. And so he reached a plea agreement. So what would be the next step that you would have in that process? Well, they would come in front of me and they would plead guilty to what they plead guilty to. And I've got to say a lot of magic words. Because if I don't say all the right magic words, then the guy says, well, my constitutional rights are violated because you didn't advise me that I had a right to a trial by jury, or you didn't tell me that if I can't pay my fine, that I can work it off through community service of up to 40 hours per month. Or you didn't tell me that after I'm released from prison, that I'm going to be supervised by the adult parole authority. So you got to say all the magic words, right? Make sure that you get all that stuff right. Then we take a break for about 4 weeks while the probation department does what's called a pre-sentence investigation. Probation department does this investigation, and what they do is they sit down with the defendant and they ask about his history, and they get information about where'd you go to school, how far did you go, what's your family history, and then of course the big one is what's your criminal history. Now, I don't consider myself to be a naive person, right? I've been in the practice of law now for almost 30, 40 years, and I've handled criminal cases over the years. I did most of my practice was civil, but most of my criminal practice was white-collar stuff. I didn't do a lot of the street crime stuff, and so I didn't see a lot of the pre-sentence investigation. And sometimes when you get to the criminal history part, it ends up kind of being like this. And it's shocking how some of these people just cycle through and through and through and through. Now, what are my options? Well, there are essentially 6 levels of felonies. There's felonies 1 through 5, with 1 being the most serious and 5 being the least serious. So you can have a first degree felony through a 5th degree felony. And then there are what are called special felonies, which are those would be truly the murder offenses for which somebody could get the death penalty, or they could get a term of say, life without parole, or 15 years to life, or what have you. The legislature, more and more, is telling the judges exactly what the judges can do. So now for a felony of the 4th degree or the 5th degree, and that would be, for example, say, just possession of cocaine, aggravated trafficking in marijuana, simple breaking and entering, the non-violent offenses are the ones that aren't as serious. There is a presumption that those people are going to get what now is euphemistically called community control. Now, it used to be called probation, the same way custodial engineers used to be janitors. So it's now community control, okay? Because we want to control these people in the community. And we have a lot of different options for the way that we can do that. We can actually send them to a facility. I could send them to the Justice Center for 6 months, or I could send them to some treatment facility or some inpatient thing. But for the most part, it's just probation. Most of these people are going to be back out on the street, and they're going to have to report to a probation officer, which is then the other thing that shows up on my docket. Probation violations. Because many of these people, unfortunately, end up in trouble because they basically have dysfunctional lives. And it's very difficult for them to obey rules of probation when they have to report on, say, a weekly basis, or they have to come in and they have to give urine samples because they're doing drug screens, or they have to get their GED within a year. Some judges, and you can do this, you can order them to get a job within a certain period of time. And all the ones that I've seen since I've been there, that's almost like guaranteeing that they're going to get a probation violation, because so many of these people just are not going to be able to do that. So many of them will cycle back through and they'll come up on probation violations, and you'll see some of that over so many people who are now committing, especially these drug offenses, and you've all read about it on the news, and you've seen the specials that say the Inquirer would run, or the TV runs, about the heroin epidemic. And I'm here to tell you it's all true. It is absolutely true. There are, it's not just people who are in the inner city who are having this problem. It's also people who find themselves taking some pain medications for a while, and then the pain medications are no longer being prescribed, but they're hooked, and all of a sudden they find themselves taking heroin because it's cheap. It's incredibly cheap. And they end up in this cycle that then all of a sudden they can't get out. I mean, I've had people in front of me who had very good jobs at Procter & Gamble and other places who just find themselves in this cycle, and they just can't find a way out. Now, we do what we can to get treatment for these people, because that's the first thing that you generally will do, especially for somebody who doesn't have that long list of offenses. A person who has just committed their first fourth or fifth degree felony is always going to get community control unless it's something extraordinary. So we try to get them treated, so we can send them to some sort of outpatient treatment, or you might have heard of Talbot House, which has a lot of facilities, or we have River City Correctional Facility, which is an inpatient correctional facility. So there are a lot of different things that we can try to do for these folks. But you know, at the end of the day, I've never fully understood addiction, and I don't fully understand why it is that some people are able to beat it and other people aren't. But it's a terrible thing when you keep seeing people cycle through the system over and over and over. So that's kind of what the morning is like, though. It's very cheery. So you get the people who are coming up, and you're going to have a lot of cases that get just kind of continued because they're negotiating, or something like that is happening, or they'll reach a plea agreement, and then you'll set it over, and then you'll have the sentencing, or they might even do what's called an agreed plea. So they agree. For example, I had some fellows today who agreed, a fellow today who agreed that he would do 10 years because of the offense that he committed. It was a fairly egregious crime that he committed. He attacked a cab driver with a knife and cut him up. The cab driver was there and spoke, but as much as anything, they wanted to get it over. But a lot of these people, especially a lot of the victims, are in that position. And I'll tell you, the area that you see it that's the most heart-rending is in the where you have a child rape situation, where these are people who need to go away for a long time. But sometimes there's a plea deal that's struck, partly because the family says, I do not want my daughter or my son or my child to go through this. And they end up doing a deal. But it doesn't mean that they're ever going to be in much of a position, because once you have somebody who does, who cuts any of those deals, who is convicted of any of those sexual offenses, they're going to have to register. They can be a tier 1, a tier 2, or a tier 3 sex offender. And if they're a tier 3 sex offender, they're going to register for life. So there is no cutoff bound for those people. Wherever they go, whenever they go, they're going to have to register for life. So that's the morning. The afternoons are civil cases, and those can be in the Court of Common Pleas. It could be any sort of traffic case. It could be my first civil jury trial was a 4-week medical malpractice case. It could be workers' compensation cases. It could be contract cases. It could be stock and securities fraud type cases, or just anything that you can imagine. But it tell you the exact way they keep track of all of them, but I can tell you this, that frequently what will happen, and I actually get a lot of cases that involve failure to register. And how they catch them, I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps Chief Hines can fill us in a little bit about how they nab them. But they have that obligation, and so I think what happens occasionally, for one thing, a lot of them are on probation. So they might be nabbed by their probation officers. They can be on probation for a period of up to 5 years. Or if they went to the penitentiary, they could be on what's called post-release control for 5 years. That's post-release control is what they used to call parole. But everything, there's a new name for everything. But they find, and if they don't register, that's a new felony offense.
Now, do they go to jail then? Are they the people that are left that gap?
They could, but it depends upon, it really depends upon, you know, I understand the philosophy behind these registration requirements, but for some of these people, for some of them, it could be a gross sexual imposition that's committed when a 19-year-old goes out with an underage girl who's his girlfriend, and it becomes a gross sexual imposition. And let's say that person then has to register for 10 years or 25 years. But sometimes they whether they lose track of it or they think that they've registered and they haven't, it's very easy for them to kind of pick up a new offense. So you end up with this kind of creating this cycle for a lot of them, where they just keep, they're in the maw of the machine, and they just keep reoffending. Yes, sir.
When I'm in the company of trial lawyers, they always rate the judges. I wonder if the judges rate them.
Oh, yeah.
And the variability.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, but what you rate of the people who are on the ends of the bell curve, you don't tend to talk a whole lot about the people who are, kind of right in the middle, because most lawyers, most lawyers do a pretty good job. I mean, they show up, they really are trying to represent their clients hard, they work the cases appropriately, but you're going to get some on either end of it who are really spectacular, and some that you think, well, I ought to be calling Terry Patterson at the Bar Association, or Terry will done something. But eventually, frequently, they will show up, and Terry will see them. But no, it's hard not to talk shop when the judges get together sometimes about those things.
I did a lot of medical malpractice work on defense, and I knew this, that judges never liked to have those in their court. And it always seemed as if the day before there was going to trial, that there was some sort of a settlement. How do you feel about trying malpractice cases in the medical field?
My first, as I mentioned earlier, my first civil trial was a 4-week medical malpractice case. I don't mind it. I like trials because I like trying cases when I was in private practice. I like trial lawyers. I think, especially when you have good ones, it's really a pleasure to watch. And I think that among the best trial lawyers that you have are the medical malpractice trial lawyers, because they've been doing it and they actually get a lot of trial experience, and the stakes are generally so high that these tend to be pretty good lawyers. So I find those to be interesting cases. So I'm happy to try a med mal case. Fine with me. Yeah,
I think in California for a lot of years they had a 3 strikes and you're out policy. Yeah. I understand the logistical cost of doing that. But do you think for, say, a felon commits their first crime, do you think knowing that if he commits 2 more he's going for good, do you think that is a deterrent?
I don't think that I don't think that most of these people are thinking about the consequences when they do any of the stuff that they do. I really don't. I mean, I think you got a lot of people who, if that was the case, then it'd be kind of difficult to describe why it is that you've got so many people who are on their 4th or 5th felony. And sometimes what they'll do, I mean, especially some of these guys, they might commit their 4th or 5th felony, but let's say it's a felony of the 5th degree. Maximum prison sentence is 1 year. So I send them away for 1 year, and I know that they're going to probably be out in about 4 months, because prisons are overcrowded, and somebody 10 years ago committed two offenses, felony offenses, and they pick up a minor offense 10 years later, and they've lived in the meantime maybe a law-abiding life, and they've been working, and maybe they've been supporting their kids, and maybe they're otherwise not a danger to society, but because they've got their third strike, we're going to put them away for decades. And I just don't think that that's I don't think that that's a productive way to either use money from the public till or treat people who probably can become productive members of society if you didn't throw them away for that.
So how successful do you think the rehab programs are?
Unfortunately, there's a tremendous amount of recidivism, even for programs that are fairly intensive like the River City program. I haven't seen statistics on it lately, but I think that, as I said earlier, I really think that it is totally a function of whether or not the person who is asking for the, or is getting the help is willing to take the help. And I think the problem is if you don't have those programs, then there are a whole lot of people out there who do want to have help, who aren't going to get it, and they're never going to be able to do it on their own. Then there's a whole other population of people who, no matter what you do or say or force them to do, they don't care. They'll go through it. And I've got people who's, I can send them to River City for 6 months, where it's a lockdown facility, but it's not technically prison, but they get programs and they get schooling and they get training on how to just deal with themselves and get over their drug abuse and alcohol abuse problems and all those life skills that we would like them to have, get their GED. Or they could go to jail for say 18 months. So that's your choice. 6 months in this program that will give you all this stuff to help you get out, and technically you will not have been in prison or prison for 18 months. And someone else says, send me away. I don't want to do that. I'd rather go to prison. Yes, sir.
Got a question for you. If you have a person who, let's say they got arrested, had 3 charges against them, they go before the judge is having a hard time with the case, and then they bring up this person's case, and that person's lawyer says, so we want to plead guilty to charge 2, which is a minor thing. If you'll drop the other 2, and the judge doesn't really look at the other 2 because he's already frustrated with the last case, and so he lets this person go on probation. Let's say this person gets in trouble again, and this person now is going to be in your court because they've done something worse. Do you have access to all of the charges that were brought against them originally, or just the one that they charged them with?
I could get all of the charges. I could get access to all of that because it's all a public document. So I could go online and find out. Now, typically the information that I'd have to do research in order to do that, because typically what I would get is I'll get this pre-sentence investigation. It might be, say, 15 to 20 pages thick. And that pre-sentence investigation will tell me what their criminal record was.
Right.
So what they were convicted of. It will tell me whether or not they went to prison for it, or whether or not they were put on community control. But it won't tell me all the charges, that were dismissed with all the facts. Now, it will tell me some of them. And actually, most of them, it might say ignored, dismissed, because maybe it goes to the grand jury and they don't indict. Okay. But so I might know that there were a bunch, but I don't know the circumstances. So I don't know whether or not, they pled to one minor thing and 2 bigger things were dismissed. But typically what's going to happen is, let's suppose let's take, for example, you've got, take one from on here. I don't want to use that first fellow I talked about because he's got too many. So here's one who's just got burglary, safe cracking, theft, burglary, safe cracking, and theft. So, now, it may well be that the burglary and the safe cracking and the theft were all basically the same offense. They just charged them. So what would happen with that one is, even if they were convicted on all 3, I could only sentence on one, right? Because it's the same conduct. So even if the same makes them guilty of all three, all of that merges. And the same, so that might be the case with the first three, and then the next three, another burglary, safe cracking, and theft, those three might also merge. So the prosecuting attorney could come and say, I tell you what, you could do on count one, the burglary, maybe that would be a felony of the second degree, but the safe cracking, let's suppose that's a felony of the third degree. So if you plead to the felony of the third degree on number 2 and on number 5, then I'll dismiss the rest of it. Well, it doesn't really matter, I mean, because I can't charge them. The only break that they're getting is that they have a lesser chance of going to, they won't go to jail as long, or the potential consequences. Now, if they come back to me, I forgot to mention this, those people on do probation violations, when you sentence them, if you have to sentence them to probation, let's suppose somebody's, that they could get a maximum 18-month sentence. When you put them on probation, you tell them, if you violate, I'm going to sentence you to 18 months. So if they come back and violate, you can send them away for 18 months. Okay? So that's what you can do anytime they plead to any of this stuff. So let's suppose somebody comes in and they're going to plead, and let's suppose for some reason that person was to get probation. Well, I could still say, I would sentence you to 18 months on the one offense and 18 months on the other offense for a total of 36 months. And the prisoners all know this because I didn't really know it until I started doing this job. That's called time on the shelf. That's your on the shelf time. So it's sitting up there. If you're good, I'll never take it off the shelf. But if you're bad, you're going to have to do the time. So, you know, there are options that are out there, but you know, it's not always easy to get a lot of that background. But when somebody has a truly hair-raising history, you'll frequently find it out in the course of doing the PSI.
I was on grand jury for a couple of weeks in September, the first 2 weeks. I found it very interesting.
It is, isn't it?
It really was educational, I would say. We spent, what, 4 or 5 hours sometimes a day, not really quite the full day, but as prosecuting attorney, we had all these cases. And
Yeah.
it was a good group of people.
And did it make you feel a little better about how the system works?
Oh, absolutely.
I think it does, because you'd be very surprised how, when you're the equity or the criminal judge, which periodically each judge has to do that for a month, you sign the grand jury reports, and it's interesting because a lot of them are ignored. I mean, if you don't think that there's enough evidence, the grand jury won't indict you.
Yeah. It was real educational.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it makes you lock your doors too, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Especially with
Yeah.
the drug use out.
Yeah, yes.
I served on a couple of juries in my lifetime, and it is amazing how seriously the people on the juries take it and how they really do work it. And,
Yeah.
and so it is a good system, and sometimes you think, you know, it's just made up of a bunch of, but it's not.
Yeah.
And the thing that's interesting is to see which ones the attorneys don't want on the jury. And at one time, because I said I was a social worker, they didn't want me.
Yeah.
So I got out of that.
Yeah, well, a lot of them think, oh, she's a bleeding heart.
Yeah.
She's never going to be able to pull the trigger on a guilty verdict. That's where she's
Yeah.
at.
But it really does show you how the other half lives.
It does, and I think, you know, I'm a big believer in the jury system, and I really have tremendous respect for the people who will actually come in and do their civic duty. And during the time that I've been both trying cases and acting as a trial judge, very few times would I say that I think that the jury just absolutely got it wrong. I thought that a lot when I was trying cases and I lost. But with the passage of time and a little bit of perspective, you frequently look at it and say, they probably were wrong.
Well, and it's tough to sit there and really listen to what everybody has to say, and then remember it so you can discuss it
Yes.
back there.
Well, I let jurors take notes.
Yeah.
So they can take notes, which helps a little bit, but that comes with its own kind of trade-offs. But, you know, it's one of the big problems, if you've ever served on a jury, is that courtrooms tend to run on islands. judge will bring the lawyers up to sidebar, and then I've got this annoying machine that I turn on to make a bunch of noise so they can't hear what we're talking about. And everybody's sitting there thinking, you know, why is this taking so long? What's going on? And it's just, we would rather it take a little longer and get it right than not. I had a situation about a month ago where we'd had a case that had been scheduled for trial several times, and we didn't, it got continued. Finally, we're ready to try. It's 10 o'clock, which is when we try to start our trials. So we've got the lawyers in, it's a criminal case, and they're back and forth, and they've got some motions, so I have to hear some pretrial motions, and then they're plea bargaining, and then they're not plea bargaining, and they're plea bargaining. They keep wanting to bring the jury in because I've got a bunch of jurors waiting because of the nature of this case. But rather than tell them, we're bringing the jury in, we're starting it right now, I let it go on for a little longer than I normally would, for a very simple reason. They finally got a deal worked out, and a 7-year-old girl didn't have to testify about the rape that she had been in the hands of her own. So when that's the situation that you're facing, you give it a while, a little bit of time to play out. But I went back and I told the jurors, I said, look, I know that you've been taking my name in vain all day, for good reason, but I just want you to know that if it wasn't for the fact that you showed up, and literally this is true, the defendant could hear the jurors on the other side of the door where they're going to be walking in, where we're getting ready. That's when he said, let's do the deal. So I told him, if it wasn't for the fact that you were there, this case would not have been resolved, and that little girl would have had to do that. So the jury system, even when the jurors don't have to sit, the jury system works.
I just want one quick question here. How much commonality is there in the legal system between different states?
Quite a bit. I mean, every state has their quirks and different ways that they do it. But if you just kind of look at what trends are going, I think most states have a lot of things that go in the same direction, like the registration laws that we talked about, the sex offender laws. I mean, there for a long while you had Megan's Law, which was named after a girl who was killed. Then we had the Adam Walsh Act. Adam Walsh being the guy that's on TV, and so they replaced Megan's Law with the Walsh Law. And so nationwide, there tend to be these periods that we go through where we have these certain types of movements. But every state has its quirks, but they're all fairly similar to what I was explaining. You have one question?
Yes, I had a question. As a member of the judiciary now, I was just wondering what your opinion was about whether judges should be elected or whether they should be appointed, like in the federal system.
You know, that is the perfect way for me to end.
A shill.
Yes, how did you know? The first thing I'll say is I'm up for election this November, and I hope you'll vote for me, and then you can put out signs and do all that other stuff. Or else I'll say Mayor Dan on it.
Oh, you don't want that?
But I'll tell you, I have very mixed emotions now. On the one hand, I think that it's very important for the people who are out there in the community to have a say in who it is that is handling some of these very important decisions in their community. The problem with electing judges is that most people don't know anything about it. It's a name game. I don't run on a platform. I can't tell you what my feeling is about a variety of different social and legal issues, because that might convey to you the impression that I'm pledging that I'm going to rule a certain way. My only platform is that I will apply the law as it is and not how I want it to be, that I'll treat everybody with fairness and equal respect, and that they'll all get a fair shake in my courtroom. So when you go out and on the campaign trail, there's really about all you can say is, well, here I am. You know, what do you want to know? Now, I've got these little placard things that, or cards that I can hand out to anybody who wants to know what my qualifications are, but beyond that, you're voting basically upon somebody based on name recognition. So that's the downside. The other problem is, if we go to the other side, you know, the question then is, okay, who's going to pick your judges? Are we going to have merit selection? Okay. How are we going to pick the people who pick the judges? All right, how are we going to assure that that's looking for the best people and not just another political backroom trade back and forth operation?
Or I was also wondering about, say, time limit on a judge. You know, in the federal system, they can have like lifetime
Yeah.
appointments. I was wondering if you had any ideas whether that was a good idea, whether, you know, there should be some type of limitation.
Well, there is a limitation in this sense. I mean, judges are up for election every 6 years. So you get a 6-year term. You cannot run again once you turn 70. So there is an upper age limit. I think that one of the problems, if you were to put a time limit, say you cannot be, say, a common pleas court judge more than 20 years, well, not a whole lot of people are going to run into that issue, because I think that somebody needs to have a little seasoning before they become a judge anyway. So by the time they get to the age where they've got that seasoning, you put a 20-year time limit, they're probably going to be at the end of the rope anyway by the time. So I don't necessarily. I think that if we're gonna elect judges, 6 years is okay.